There's definitely something about how we promote ourselves and our image coming up next year. We've got a general election. If you think about all the people that work in care and the millions of people supported in care and potentially their families, there's quite a lot of people to mobilise to ask their local candidate to actually think about this. I think we should try. So let's think then about a bit more about public perception. Charlotte, you're in the world of insurance. What do you think, from your perspective, we could do to create that sort of social care brand that Claire's talking about and harness the getting them young angle that Anita's on?
I love Anita's angle on that. I think that's the way forward. I think there is a public and professional problem about the translation of what we do. It's not just the public that do not understand. It is our professional partners that do not understand. We are a pathway which gets them out of their environment into our environment. There is a lack of professional understanding as well as public understanding. One of the key things that my team have done for a long time is translate what goes on from in the social care sector to our underwriters, to our claims teams. That translation is also about finding a shared language, about people understanding. And I think you said early on, Liz, a lot of people don't have an understanding of social care until they interact with it. And then their understanding is based on that interaction. I know for me personally, I had no idea of what social care did until I actually needed social care myself when I was physically unwell. And I think it's without having that experience, you know, we don't encounter it. We also have an issue of being done to rather than done with. And I think that's a really key element, whether it's in policy, whether it's through funding, whether it's through media. It is their perspective of us, not us saying, this is what we do, this is who we are, these are the stories that we have to tell. So we're letting somebody else write our narrative a lot of the time. Mm. And whilst if we are lobbying or being involved in reviews, they're generally things on a negative. So looking at, say, COVID, we're looking at what should we learn from this? You know, if there is ever an incident, we go, what do we learn? Sometimes we forget, what do we do well? What are the benefits of being in our industry? What makes us different? Why would you want to come into it? And I think sometimes because some of what we do from a media and public's perception is end of life, or when you have an illness or a disability, some things that are socially perceived as negative, we then have those negative connotations. I think what we've all agreed today is that what we do, the professionals that we work with do an amazing job. And how is that narrative getting out there? And things like making this obtainable. Also, our terminology is problematic. I remember going from one part of the industry or sector to another and not being able to understand what anybody was talking about, because we do speak in acronyms. And that sometimes can make it very difficult for the public to understand. Or looking at some of the media publicity around nurses, say in the last couple of weeks. That's negative publicity. That's one nurse. Not saying what other nurses in other parts of the sector are doing it. And I think there is that headline grabbing that we are a demonised sector as well, because that sells papers and that sells medias.
Yeah, the challenge of getting positive headlines is quite significant. I think controlling the narrative, at least trying to recraft some of the narrative, is something that we try quite a lot to do. We talk a lot about the positive aspects of social care, and we talk a lot about, you know, individual experiences. Our members send us news all the time about the amazing things that have happened in their day, the things that providers do all the time to make that day a bit more special. I mean, I suspect it's not just us that have headlines that are focused on the negative. Making friends with the journalists is one thing, getting the positive stories.
And how do we get those relatable, I suppose, to the public as well? Understanding, and I think that's the thing, we've got into this, I don't want to say gruesome culture, but that's what people are looking at rather than positive events.
Yeah, there's a
it?
lot of catastrophizing, and that doesn't sell us, particularly as a potential employer. You try and do quite a lot of media, don't you?
Yeah, because I just think people have an awful impression of care homes, and I think it's not like that. So any opportunity we get just to bring the cameras in, show what people are doing, show pictures on our Facebook, just tell those stories, because the perception is not the reality. And people think, I don't want to go into a care home. And actually, when they go into a care home, they think, this is lovely. There's people around you all the time. You can control your day. You're never lonely. You can choose your food. You get to go out to the pub. It's just not what people think. So any chance we get to shout about that. I mean, I do a weekly email to all of the staff and the trustees, and there's always feedback that we get. You know, relatives just say the loveliest things because the staff are pretty phenomenal. And it's just getting that message out there. The staff really do care. They don't do it for the money.
No, indeed. There's definitely something about how we promote ourselves and our image. I think there are opportunities coming up next year. We've got a general election. And if you think about all the people that work in care, you mentioned it's something like 1.6 million people work in care, and the millions of people supported in care, and potentially their families. There's quite a lot of people to mobilise to ask their local candidate to actually, think about this. I think we should try.
I mean, we started, didn't we, with a conversation or mentioning data. And I think data has huge value because if we benchmark the sector, and I'm talking from our point of view as care providers, care professionals, and then showcase that, then there would be a very different perception than the perception of a nurse has committed these murders, a social worker has let this child die, a somebody, or the media coverage that gets circulated when people like our inspector at CQC issue reports. That's very different and very skewed. But if we can say, in our sector, this is what's happening, then we can change the narrative, and then people will have great confidence, because the majority of care homes are outstanding and good. Yeah. That's the story that people want to know. And the other thing, I think we have to change how we collect data. If we ask somebody, do you want to go into the care home, and that person's perfectly independent and self-caring, then the answer is going to be, no, I don't, or over my dead body, or whatever it is that somebody's going to say. But if you say to somebody, well, would you rather have a stroke or dementia and then go into a care home? It's like, well, I don't want either, thank you. But often we don't have a choice. These things happen to us, and then we're there and we've got to make a choice. So sometimes it's who we're asking and how we're asking is the wrong question. I do believe that our services need to be person-centred. I do believe that our services need to be enabling. I do believe that we should have, ensuite personalised services, privacy, dignity, all of that. But again, that comes back to the funding. The funding has to be right. You can't get these things on a shoestring. So we need to completely rewrite the story, but we have some great stories to tell to bolster it, I think.
It's a good point. I mean, whenever it's quite hard to do research around what the kind of customer of the future might want, because you have to be able to project yourself 30 years forward, 20 years forward, 10 years forward, and think about what your life might be like living with frailty or living with, a range of long-term conditions. And then you have to think about the environment that you're living in. So you might be in a nice flat house, it might be fine, but actually in a few years it might need lots of adaptations. You might be able to drive and get places, or you might be able to get on the bus and get places, but actually if your mobility is severely limited in 20 years, you might not. You might like the garden, but you might not be able to do it in 20 years. And none of those things are fun to think about. So when you're trying to ask people what they might imagine the world to be like, they're thinking about themselves as they are now in their environment in 20 years. So if you said to somebody, well, actually you might only ever be able to be in the downstairs part of your house, or you might never really be able to get in the garden without some help, or it might be that actually lots of your friends have moved away or passed away, and actually you don't know your neighbours because they've all changed and you didn't get to know them. You kind of try and create a change curve for their imagination, and then you're asking the question, really, would you be happy in this place without the access to the community that you have now, and without the connections and companionship you have now, and potentially seeing a care professional, 2 hours a day? How would that feel? And that's a really hard question to answer, isn't it? So I do think that there's some value in doing that kind of turning the telescope and asking people who are living in care settings what it's done for them, what's different, why, what's the best things about it. Okay, so I think we've had a pretty fruitful discussion, got quite a lot of topics out there. I guess I want to ask you two things to wrap up. What do you think is the most important thing for a sustainable care sector for the next 20 years? And is that the same or different to the thing you want at the top of the manifesto for each party for the next election? Claire?
Well, the first one's easy, just fund it properly. I mean, I'm not sure if the party can deliver this, but I would just like people to see you and have a really good career in social care. It's a really good place to work. It's secure, it's meaningful, you work with a great team, you can really make a difference. You can be running a care home at 30. I'd just like people to see it's a great place to work.
Okay. I'm thinking about our manifesto, as you can see. Anita?
I think funding, definitely, because with funding, opportunities come. Manifesto, I just love people to be open and honest, and let's embrace that. Let's be compassionate, caring towards others, and just, if the parties would be open and honest and caring towards our citizens, life will be a lot more pleasurable for everybody, I think.
Okay.
Not asking for much, Anita.
She's asking for compassionate, empathetic, person-centred care. Charlotte?
I'm going to have to say funding, because again, it's a springboard to everything else that we have been discussing. If we have the money, then we can invest it in those who work for us. And I think that's a good solid foundation to go for right here, right now. In regarding to manifestos, understand what we do, understand who we are, understand what we represent. Because I think that how can you make any manifesto if you don't get what we do in social care? And I think many of the people who are writing the policies at the top and who are standing there haven't, other than, holding a baby or coming and shaking a hand for a photo opportunity, they don't know what we do. So start understanding us.
Well, I'm quite pleased that so far your manifestos and top asks are in my list.
Yay.
I was talking with colleagues from Australia yesterday, and in recent elections, the sector they called aged care has been a top political battleground. So it is possible. We just need to get it up that agenda, I think. So I think it's time to wrap up. Thank you all very much for giving us your time, giving us your wisdom and your insights, being really honest about experiences and learning and what we can strive for, as well as what our sector is brilliant at. And I think if there's one thing that I'd like our listeners, viewers, audience to take away, is to start using the term social care professional to describe everybody who works with us. So look out for the next episode. And remember, social care really matters. It matters to us all. You are probably likely to need it, or somebody you know will need it at some point during your life. So let's work together to build a better, more sustainable system. Thank you.